No, but seriously, how does one start a wrap up?
Fuck knows.
I guess I want to start this video in the most English way I know how, which is with an apology. I'm sorry. I did not read all of the books in my TBR. We're going to go through the books that I did and didn't read, but I just want to start with the ones that I didn't read. So, I don't want you to be upset. They're going back in my top trumps pile, and to be honest, I read more books this month than I thought I would, so I'm actually pretty proud of myself. I've not finished a book for 10 months until the beginning of November, and we'll talk about how and why that happened. But essentially, I did my master's in creative writing. I spent a lot of time reading a lot of books, and then I went straight back into teaching, and I didn't have time and I didn't have inclination, and I just could not find a book that I enjoyed, and it was really frustrating because I love to read. I've always loved to read. I was that girl sat in the back of the classroom, even as a teacher, and reading a book rather than talking and disrupting other people. I was doing that as well, but generally I was reading. So for a while I thought I'd lost that, because when you're doing a master's or any degree, you spend so much time forcing yourself to read certain stuff that it kind of numbs you to anything else, and you don't get to read for enjoyment anymore. So I'm really glad that I was able to kind of kick that, and I've read more books in the last month than I've read the rest of the year, really. So yeah, really, really happy with that. But as I said, there were 2 books on my TBR that I did not get to. So I didn't get to Empress of All Seasons. I own it. I bought it the other day, but I didn't get a chance to read this book just because I ran out of time. So November ended before I got a chance to read this one. And Ninth House I didn't read. Now this was a bit more tactical. I have put the hardback as my... I have put the hardback on my Christmas wish list, so I didn't really want to buy this one because I think I'm going to get it for Christmas. So I was going to borrow it from the library. I also thought there was no point me borrowing it from the library if I wasn't going to have a chance to read it in November. So each month one of the books that is in my TBR is going to be a library book, and one of them is going to be an audiobook. And because I'd already chosen an audiobook, I couldn't do Ninth House as an audiobook. So they will both go back in my TBR top trumps pile, and I obviously did my independent book tour where I bought loads of books from independent bookshops. They will also be made into new cards, so maybe I'll pull out one of those, or I won't, and we'll see. But I've been using all the cards anyway, so I just want to show you what happens to the cards once I've pulled them out. So I keep journals. I've always kept journals. If you've seen my life review, you'll see that I've got journals going back from like when I was 14 years old and younger than that. So I turned the top trumps cards into spreads for the books that I read this month. So I put the cards in, and then I keep a track of a little synopsis from the back of the book, my rating, a summary comment, and then a first impression and a lasting impression, which I've written, which is all my own opinion, and then how many pages I read on what dates and how quickly I read them. So for example, Piecing Me Together I managed to read in 3 days, which I was really proud of. Sorka Girls took me a few more days. Sorcery of Thorns was my audiobook, so that took me a week to get through, and because I actually started my November TBR a week into November as opposed to on the 1st, I didn't manage to get through all the books. But I'll be referring back to this anytime I forget the points that I was going to make. We'll talk about the book that kicked off my November reads, which was The Hazelwood. Now, I know a lot of writers get a lot of stick when they respond to people on Twitter or Goodreads, mainly because what they say is problematic, and I guess because I was so positive about this book, Melissa was actually really, really lovely. So I would definitely recommend following her on Twitter. The Hazelwood is kind of a book of 2 halves. So the first half, your main characters are in New York and they're trying to solve a mystery. And the second half is kind of a modern Alice in Wonderland, but with more LSD. So essentially the story is that Alice is a girl who has never really had a home. Her and her mum live in the back of their car. They move around a lot and bad luck is chasing them. And in the first few chapters they kind of set up that bad luck isn't just a case of stepping in gum. Like it's their house is getting set on fire, their stuff is being stolen, and they're constantly on the move. And it's just the two of them. There's no dad, and the mum does not talk to her mother either. Her mother was a woman who wrote a book called The Tales of the Hinterland and became really famous, and it was turned into a film, but unfortunately along with all that came this really bad luck, and Ella, the mother, and Alice are trying to escape it. And I really liked the idea of it being like bad luck chasing them, and it was almost personified, the bad luck. It seemed to be really out for blood, and it was quite dark and quite twisty, and I really, really liked that. And the one issue that I had with this book really is it does feel like a book of two halves. It doesn't feel long enough. It's not a particularly big book, but it doesn't feel long enough for what the book is trying to do. The first half is beautifully written. I mean, it's all beautifully written, but the first half is a beautiful setup of these two women trying to escape something horrible. And when they think the grandmother has died, they think the bad luck is over, and then it turns out it isn't. And I'm not going to give away the ending, but the second half of the ending is really quite difficult to wrap your head around. A lot happens very, very quickly, and we're expected to kind of just keep up with the ever unravelling world of the hinterland. And considering how deep the stories go and how important they are to the main characters, I kind of just wanted a little bit more of the hinterland. Now, I know Melissa has written the stories that are referenced in this. I don't know if that's out yet or if that's on its way, but I would definitely read those. So I've kind of put those... I have no idea what's happened to my voice. I was fine 5 minutes ago and now it's gone all weird. So yeah, I'm quite excited to read more from her, to be honest. I do think that if you're into fairy tales, you're kind of split into two camps. You have the Disneyland fairy tales and then you have the Grimm's fairy tales. So this is definitely more of the Grimm's fairy tales. If you're hoping for pretty princesses and happy endings, this is not the book for you. But if you are into the dark and the gruesome, then this is definitely the book for you. And one more thing that I really, really liked about this is I am not a massive romance and love story fan, and I find that a lot of YA fantasy has either a love triangle in it or a love story for the sake of a love story or love triangle, and there is no kind of romantic entanglement in this at all. It is all kind of platonic. Her and her best this best guy friend kind of go through and kind of like they don't start off as friends. Alice doesn't really want any friends because she knows that she can't stick around forever. But just like the mutual respect, I really appreciate it, because I think sometimes it's a bit of a cop-out when they add romance for the sake of adding romance. But I gave this a 5 stars because I absolutely loved it, and I cannot thank Melissa enough for writing a book that was able to get me out of my reading slump. So thank you very much. The second book I read was The 3-Year Pond and Other Absurdities by Simon Pollard. Now this is a self-published book. It is a mix between a nature writing and memoir book, and I actually work with Simon Pollard. So I am part of a group called BNI, which is a Business Network International, I think it stands for. But essentially I'm a freelance writer, so the way that I get work is through this business group, and Simon Pollard is a landscaper that's part of this group as well. He's a really, really nice guy. He does all kinds of YouTube videos about different elements of your garden and making sure that your garden is nature friendly. So rather than having a brick wall fence, you're having hedgerow, making sure that you've got space for birds and hedgehogs and all sorts of things, and how to make the most of your garden in a really natural way. And I actually was lucky enough to go to the launch of this book when it first came out. And I didn't actually read it when it first came out, so I read little bits of it and then I reread it in November because I've started working with Simon on his most recent book, and I'm helping him with his book tour and other marketing things for this book. So there are still copies available for this on Amazon, but I think he's only got a few of the first edition left. I think he's moved on to the second and maybe third edition now, I don't know. I really should check. But I found it quite interesting. I don't read a lot of memoir, and I certainly don't read mindfulness books or books on nature I really love a nature documentary. I quite like being told stuff like that. And Simon is working on an audiobook, so I'd be far more interested in taking in the audiobook. But actually, I was quite impressed. When you're a self-published writer, it's not always easy to kind of narrow down what it is you're trying to say, and I do think this struggles a bit because it hasn't been edited in the way that I would edit it, and it struggles because it feels like it's 2 or 3 books crammed into one. But if you're looking for some interesting and slightly different self-published work, I would definitely recommend this. I gave it 3 stars because, like I said, there were things that, because it's not to my standard taste, that I found a bit frustrating. But actually, I don't think it's his first attempt at a book, but I think this is maybe his official attempt at self-publishing. I was actually quite impressed. And I know that it can be quite hard with self-publishing to get people to recognise how much work goes into a book like this. There is a lot of work. And, the actual... His stories span across 3 years in this. So it was a big chunk of his life, and not the easiest life either. So if you're looking for something a little bit different and you want to support a self-published author, this is my recommendation for November. Okay, so the first category was author, and I had Saw Kill Girls as opposed to Margaret Atwood for that. And I'm so glad. If I could write a book that's half as good as this, I'll be really happy with myself. It's about 3 separate girls who live on an island. Loads of girls have been going missing, presumed dead, and no one seems to notice or care. Everyone on the island is really rich and just kind of living their best life, and they don't seem to care or notice that part of the sacrifice for this perfection is the fact that there is a demon monster eating young girls. So you have Marion, who's the new girl. She immediately sparks off this kind of supernatural element to the story. She sees things that aren't really there. Animals react to her in a really spooky way, and she seems to be able to see past the facade that the demons have created. Zoe was my least favourite character at the beginning, but actually kind of spurs on the mystery the whole way through. So she's the daughter of the chief, the sheriff, chief, like whatever it is, chief of police, who lives on the island, and she has lost her best friend. Her best friend is one of the murder victims. She hates Valerie, who's the 3rd girl, and is convinced that Valerie is the murderer. And you find out quite early on that, yes, Valerie is responsible for these girls going missing. Not just her, she's been feeding them to a demon. And what I quite liked is the fact that it's split between what the audience knows and what the characters know. The audience doesn't know everything, but the fact that we are given this insight actually allows us to sympathise with Valerie quite a lot. If you like Supernatural or Buffy the Vampire Slayer or Sabrina, anything where there's that hint of supernatural, but the mystery is very human and very cold and quite analytical, then this is definitely the one for you. I loved the style of writing. It feels decidedly feminist and decidedly feminine because it's led by those 3 female voices. You also hear the voice of the rock, the island that they're living on, and I'm assuming it's a he, maybe it's a she. It feels very masculine. It's kind of the only masculine voice. Wants to protect the people that live there, and it knows that there's this demon that's doing something evil, and it kind of invites these 3 girls onto the island in the first place to save everyone, because this has been going on for hundreds of years. It's really dark. There are a lot of elements of really gory stuff, so if you're a fan of like horror films, gothic fiction, murder mysteries, this book has something for you. I gave it 5 stars because I absolutely loved it. If there was going to be a favourite book of the month, it would probably be a tie between this one and The Hazelwood. I loved it. And if that wasn't clear, I'm just going to say it one more time. Like, I just thought it was fantastic. Yeah, so a really short review. I don't really know how to explain how much. It was just the flavour, you know what I mean? So the next one was page numbers. I originally was decided, how do I explain this? I don't want to say I was cheating, but I definitely feel like I cheated by making this the longest book, the audiobook. I was not convinced I was going to have enough time to finish enough books to make this an interesting video. I was halfway between finishing Sword Kill Girls when I had about 4 or 5 days left, and I knew I wouldn't be able to finish Sword Kill Girls in that time, and another book. So I decided to listen to this one as an audiobook. Now, I have a lot of issues with this story. It was not my fave by any stretch, and I feel like stuff that I didn't like about it was actually saved more than I realised by listening to it as an audiobook rather than reading it. If you're going to take anything away from this book, I didn't hate it. It's not my fave. I don't think I'd recommend it. When I said about the Hazelwood splitting 2 different types of fairy tale readers, if you like the Disney style of fairy tale rather than the Grimm's fairy tale, this is for you. It felt like a retelling of Beauty and the Beast, but without the charm of Beauty and the Beast. So you've got your main character, Elizabeth, who lives in a library, one of the great libraries where sorcerers' grimoires are kept safe. And the stakes at the beginning are that she wants to become a warden, which is someone who kind of protects these grimoires. And I just remember rolling my eyes. There's a sentence right at the beginning that was essentially, she had another year before she'd be able to apply as a warden. And I was like, cool, so that gives us a year for her to mess it all up completely, because of course she is, otherwise how will the story start? She befriends this sorcerer when things start to go horribly wrong. And that's kind of where I lost interest. So her director dies, this woman who kind of backed her right from the start, because she was an orphan found and brought to the library and kind of raised in this library. So she has friends there, but only one, really, and like the books talk to her more than everyone else, and she doesn't seem to notice that until midway between the book. But this sorcerer comes and takes her for a trial after the director dies, because everyone thinks she did it, or that she had some kind of involvement. One element I did quite like is the fact that the grimoires, when something goes wrong with them, they become a malefic. They become a demon that she then has to fight. So the boring bits were kind of broken up with these fight scenes with these demonic books. But there wasn't enough about the library and the history of the library. I actually wrote in my wrap-up book that I was 10 chapters in before I had any idea what was going on with this book. So much happens in those first 10 chapters that you don't really get a chance to breathe and understand how the world works. You're kind of just expected to understand that sorcerers exist and libraries exist and this happens, and then they're off with the royals, and then this happens, and it's just, it moves so quickly that you don't really have time to care about anyone. So the fact that she doesn't have friends has no consequences, and the fact that then she turns out in the next chapter does have one friend has no consequences, and the fact that she was brought up in a library has no relevance until like chapter 27. So it doesn't really, like, it's all just a bit rushed. I could see this being turned into a TV series and really like extended, because I feel like this needed to be more than one book, but it is a standalone, and I know that Margaret Rogerton has said that this was quite a hard book for her to write, as it was her second ever book, and there were just too many things that frustrated me. Also, can we talk about the fact that there is no sex in this book? Now, I know a lot of people have a real thing about putting sex in YA, and I get that, but there is such a tease scene where Elizabeth and Thorne are like sat in the dark, and she's like talking about her nightie and how soft her skin is, and then all of a sudden Silas the demon just wanders in and interrupts. Like, why? Also, why isn't it Elizabeth and Silas? Her and Silas spend more time in a room together than anyone else. They have more conversations, they have more in common and more understanding of each other, but no, that's fine. She'll just go off with Thorne anyway, even though there's literally no chemistry between them. All he does is make snarky comments. I don't understand. It was like they were trying to go for Beauty and the Beast, and then they were like, oh, but let's not do Beauty and the Beast. We'll do Beauty and the somewhat Beast, who hangs out with the actual Beast. And there'll be no sexual chemistry, and then no sex, because it's YA. I mean, I have a lot of feelings. And we'll leave it at that. And then my wild card. Just making sure my brother doesn't laugh on camera. My wild card was piecing me together. This was actually the first one I read of my TBR after I finished Hazelwood, and I cried. This actually made me cry. let's start with what it's about. That might help. So Jade is a young black girl living in quite a poor neighbourhood but going to quite a rich school. She has worked really hard for a scholarship, and she's been given all these opportunities, and it's quite evident early on that these opportunities are kind of, she feels like a charity case because of these opportunities. And she doesn't want to be a charity case. She wants to be someone who can give back. And she also needs to learn how to use her voice and kind of stand up for herself. And it's really, really obvious that Renee Watson has a real love of women standing up for themselves and learning to speak for themselves. And it was just really, really powerful as well. And I'm so worried that if I over-egg this, that I'm just going to sound really patronising, because there are quite a few white characters in this who just do not understand what they are saying when they are talking to people of colour and how damaging what they do is to them. And I would hate to think that I'm that person. And yeah, I cried like a little baby. About midway through, and then 2/3 of the way through, and then at the end, because it was just perfection. And if you've not read this yet, you need to. It's beautiful. Yeah. And then that's it. Those are my books for my TBR. Okay, underneath this video you will find a link to my TBR from last month, so that you can actually see why I chose those books. If I haven't covered it, I probably have. We'll check in editing. You'll also see that I've done an independent book tour, so I went around to independent bookshops in my area, and made sure that I spent money in all of them to try and support independent bookshops. And I will also, yeah, maybe I should just leave it there. How do I close these? How have I forgotten to YouTube? Have a nice day.